the thing is that when you run a web campaigns, you are able to track much more than aggregated events measurement campaign. Around 20% more, I would say, on average.
Why do you need web-based user acquisition for your mobile app? Hello and welcome to Growth Masterminds, the podcast for growth marketers. My name is John Gessica. I've just been putting together Singular's quarterly trends report for Q1 2025. It's not out yet. It'll be out in a couple of weeks. One big thing I've noticed, there's so much more web-based UA going on. What's happening? What's going on here? Why is that? Someone else has also noticed that. I guess a lot of someone else's, I'm not sure, but one person in particular, and she recently spoke about transitioning user acquisition from app to web. Her name is Gessica Bicego. She's a growth consultant, a fractional CMO. She is a former CMO at Paired, the couples app. She's also the former senior director of performance marketing and growth for Blinkist, and she worked at Kayak as well in programmatic marketing. Kayak, of course, is a travel search engine I used all the time when I traveled more. Welcome, Gessica. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. What a nice intro. I'm really, really excited to be here talking about what right now is one of my favorite topics.
Awesome. And it's kind of funny. We found out, you knew, and I found out via search of my old email. We actually spoke before on Mobile Heroes, which I did for Lift Up with Peggy and Salts for a couple of years. So I'm so pumped about getting back together and chatting. You were great then, and I'm sure you're going to be great right now. Let's dive right in. You spoke about transitioning user acquisition from app to web. Why is it a broad question? How'd that come to your attention? Why did it seem important? Why did you start spending time on it?
Yeah, of course. This is going to be a long story, so bear with me. But it started actually the first time that I started to tackle app in general, subscription app. So when I started at Blinkist, I was coming from a more of a web, let's say, background, because I was, as you mentioned, I was at Kayak before. There was at the moment, mainly on web. And so I arrived at Blinkist. They were spending a few $100 on Meta. So the first thing that I did was definitely establishing Meta as one of the main channels. At the time, it was called Facebook. My God. And then the second goal that I had was to find a new channel. And we started to invest on paid content. So writing, instead of sending people to the App Store or the Play Store, putting a piece of content in the middle to, explain to the user, to engage with the user with an interesting piece of content. And we were advertising that mainly through Taboola and Outbrain. That was still to the day, one of the main successes that I was able to drive together with my team at Blinkist, because suddenly, instead of sending people to the App Store, we were able to send people to a piece of content and then upsell them. So they will always end up to the App Store or the Play Store, but it was that piece in the middle. And it really, really allowed us to unlock a new potential growth channel. Outbrain and Taboola, they are really cheap, the CPMs are really cheap, but also it became a useful driver for Meta acquisition. So we were actually driving people to these landing pages, and then they were converting directly on app. So that was the first time that actually I started to do this. And I think I was not really even thinking about what I was doing. I didn't call it web2app, that is the term that you use now. But that was the first time, and it just happened because there were a lot of synergies between the audience that Blinkist was trying to address and the audience, of channels like Outbrain and Taboola. These people are reading. Blinkist is about consuming books, so that made the perfect sense, and that's how it started. And then, to be honest, what happened is that I followed, after I left Blinkist, I joined Paired as the CMO. And it kind of happened the same. Initially, so first of all, actually, there was a big change that drove me to this new opportunity. There was ATT, of course, another hot topic.
Yes,
the fact that I told this story many times, that I left, I left from my maternity leave, and then I came back to this new world, and I was in shock. I was like, what do you mean you cannot track this? What do you mean you have to wait 48 hours? It was shocking. Still, at that time, I was trying to get the most out of everything, trying to track as much as possible. And then I think it was maybe last year where I started to see that many apps started to use web acquisition. And we thought like, okay, why don't we try? Because it's going to give us better attribution. You're going to tap into, like, I didn't know it at the time, but you're tapping into a completely new audience that is not the
Mhm.
same that you would target with app campaigns. So we just thought, let's try. And it was a big success. So by the time that I left, I think like over 60% of the acquisition was like we switched it to web campaigns.
Wow.
And I think that's where I realized, well, there's a big opportunity. And since then, I've been working with like a handful of clients right now because I left Paired in September to build my consultancy business. And it's always the same. Like it doesn't work for everyone, but so far, most of the companies that I've been working with, they already had like a strong app acquisition. And then you just like put in this like, extra, let's say, layer of complexity of the website. And it really, really helps to like increase growth. So you can spend more, tap into a different audience, leverage the same creatives that you have. And yeah, that's how it happened. And together with there's like two, I would say, big, let's say, how do you call them? Big ways to do web acquisition for apps. One is that you have this landing page in the middle, but at the end, you drive people to the store. So conversion happens there. So it's just like a way to tap into a different audience, have better tracking. And then you have the second part that is the web onboarding. This is also really trending in the app world,
Yeah.
where you
Yeah.
send people to these long quizzes and then they convert online. But yeah, it's kind of like necessity, curiosity, opportunity, and apparently I became an expert. So that was fun.
I love that intro because there's like three things happening there, right? One is, hey, it works, and it fits, and there's new methods of getting different people here. So that's great. There's a strategic imperative there. Second, there's a massive technology change. ATT came along and IDFAs became scarce. And so on iOS, there was an additional reason to do this. And you hinted at a third at the end in terms of the web onboarding, which is actually we can capture more of the revenue by not paying app store fees. And you hinted that we'll get deeper into that as well as we go.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So that's kind of the history of where you got into this. And I think that really tracks really well to where the industry's come on this as well. When you do that, what changes in your funnel and what's significant about that for good or for bad?
So it really depends which one of this direction you take. I would say let's exclude web onboarding and make it like a special topic that we discuss later because it's his own word and it's like much more complex if you want.
Mm-hmm.
But when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to the web to app, I think what happens is that you so first of all, I don't know if I would be if I were like a completely new company that hasn't like done anything on acquisition, if I would start with web. I think it makes sense that you start with app just because it's more direct. And then the thing is that at some point you hit like a threshold or you don't have the resources actually to grow more. Like simply you don't have like more than one campaign manager to be able to like, manage the complexity. What you can do is like just plug in the web to app, and this just gives you access, as I mentioned before, to a new set of users. Like I did an experiment where I tried to run the same ad in the same broad audience with the same creative. And you could see that there was like a clear difference in the web users and in the app users. The web users were a bit older, the conversion were higher, although the CPMs were also higher on web. So
Okay.
these are maybe like, the things that are not so good. Like you are tapping into a better audience most of the times, but that audience is also a bit more expensive. And
Yeah.
then you have the big issue of like cross tracking because you're
Sure.
sending people to web. You need to run web campaigns optimized for a web event, but at the end, the conversion are happening in app. So you
Mm-hmm.
need a way to convert back in app events with pixel events on Meta. And I think that's where the complexity comes. Every MMP is completely different. So unfortunately, like all the solutions are completely different. I think now the MMPs are evolving. So I think when I started, everything was really manual. Like you have to
Yes.
build the MMP link yourself. Like it was like a different word, a sad word. But right now, the MMPs are evolving. And for example, Singular offer like the web SDK. So you don't really have to build the link yourself. We'll take care of everything automatically. But there's always like, you always need to make sure that you send back the right information, that you're triggering the events at the right moment. So I would say that is the complexity. But then in terms of like the campaigns per se, they can be amazing. And again, you don't need special creatives. Although what I have seen is that sometimes you have some creatives that responds better to web campaigns Sometimes it's magic. Sometimes I don't know why. They respond
That's
better to
creative, right?
these. Exactly. So again, there's a lot of like pros, some cons as well. It's not that easy, but it usually pays off pretty soon. And I would say what I've seen, the main complexity that I see with companies is how can we make the tracking work?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah,
only thing.
exactly. It's really interesting that you talked about your audiences and on web a little bit older and converting better, because one of the things that I saw in your talk was CPT, cost per trial. And your cost per trial, which is an interesting metric and not a common metric, maybe more for subscription apps, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
not one that you hear every day. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
CPT was 60% lower. It reminded me of a marketer I was talking to, also in a subscription area space, who they excluded young people from their audiences because they just
Mm-hmm.
didn't convert. They just didn't actually convert to that last step, right? What did you attribute this cost per trial, 60% down? What did you attribute that to?
Yeah. So first of all, I have to be honest, I have to come clean. I cheated a little bit because
The best marketers are cheaters.
look, I had to do it. But the thing is that when you run a web campaigns, you are able to track much more than aggregated events measurement campaign. Around 20% more, I would say, on average. I don't know with scan because I'm not like, I didn't have a lot of success with scan campaigns recently. So I'm comparing it more with aggregated events measurement. So this means that by nature, like, of course, your CPT needs to be lower,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
not 60% lower. So I think that big gap comes from the fact that you can track better. So you simply have more users that you can track that normally in an aggregated events, the IEM campaigns will come through like organic. So they will still be there. You will just not be able to track it. So this is like really good insights for the audience. If you do web campaigns, your CPT targets need to be at least 20% lower to your normal Meta campaigns. And I mean what you can see on Meta. But still, we were able, like what I've registered, what I recorded is like, I'm still able to see better cost per trial. And I think the reason is like the audience makes more sense. It's just a better and more qualified audience. One, two, it's an audience that maybe you have not been hitting before. It's a new audience. Like maybe you've been running app campaigns for the past 1 year and people are tired of seeing the same creative over and over again. And then suddenly you're tapping into a completely new set of users. And that's why it works. I also work with companies that mainly are targeting people, I would say over 30, like over 25, even better if it's over 30. I think if it was maybe like a dating company, actually, I would be curious. Like, I'm wondering if it would be the same. We'll have to figure it out.
I'll have to do that test.
I need a dating
I love
client.
I love the first part of what you're saying is that it, essentially part of that 60% is a measurement function. It reminds me of somebody, a marketer was talking on LinkedIn about advanced dedicated campaigns on TikTok, which of course went down yesterday and came back magically.
I know.
Instantly.
Crazy
Totally
story.
crazy world we live in. But ADC on TikTok, and they're saying it's wonderful, it's great. And here's a non-ADC campaign, here's an ADC campaign, and here's my difference. And the ADC was so much better. What if, take the pill here, we're in the matrix, the results of both were exactly identical, but the measurement just changed.
Exactly.
And so that's
yeah, I know. And this is really an important part because, the first time you launch, you're like, oh my God, that's awesome. And you're like, well, it's normal, that is a bit better. So it's good. It's good to know.
I want to talk about mini mobile web landing pages. And so we'll get into web onboarding, talk about that and the revenue story and all that stuff. I'm looking forward to that. I also want to ask you about paid content. You mentioned it briefly, but I want to dive into that a little bit more because I think it's an unusual tactic for mobile apps. And I think it's very effective for a couple that I've talked to. But let's go to mini mobile web landing pages. What did you learn? I mean, this is a really challenging thing here, right? You're putting a step between what you want people to do and where they are right now. And so there can be real challenges, but you did learn how to minimize friction there, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So I would say there's a word at some point at Player, we figured out a trick that really, really helped us to like boost the efficiency of this flow. before this trick that we have found, what I was trying to do, like I was trying to build landing pages that were really minimal. So it will have the minimal information and they would be as similar as possible to the ad that I was driving traffic with. So if you had like, and I think you can see an example like with companies like Headway, you'll see that whenever they're targeting, sometimes they target parents, then they will have the landing page will be about parenting. If they're targeting women, it will be about women and so on and so forth. So we will be trying to do the same. The landing page would be like really easy, brand, let's say title, something like visual that reminded you of the ads, and then like a big call to action to go to the app store. And this was working well. Now, the issue that we found is that because at the time we were using an MMP that did not have a web SDK, we were building the MMP link with the parameters that we will send through Meta. And we would be doing that only when the user was actually clicking on the CTA to download the app. So we would lose all the people that we actually click on the ad, land on the landing page, but that it would not take any action. So to be honest, a little bit by a mistake, we say like, okay, what if we were to trigger the attribution as soon as the user lands on the page? And then the magic happened. But what is funny is that we didn't figure it out until months later. Suddenly our campaigns were working. We definitely saw more conversion attributed to that, but we didn't really figure it out until at some point we realized that, and we do it like you can see when you preview the ads directly on Meta. So we were checking the landing pages that were working, we were checking them on mobile, but at some point we send ourselves like a notification on the phone, and then we noticed that something magic happened. Because we were triggering this attribution to the NNP, Meta automatically says like, okay, I need to load the App Store because I don't know, something is happening. Yes. So there will be like a preload, like automatic preload of the App Store happening as soon as users click. So they actually see the page just for like maybe a couple of seconds and then it preloads. And that, of course, like made a huge difference, right? Because then you don't have the friction of like people having to download. They are on the store. Exactly. Yeah. They are also like, it's not about like, they are in an environment that they understand, that they know, that they recognize, and they can look at the apps and see what's going on. And that actually had like a huge impact. So it's something that I apply to everyone, if I do mini landing pages, I do that. What does it mean? That right now, the landing page, it's not really relevant, right? Like people, they go to the landing page, but most of them, they will like see the App Store right away. So it doesn't really matter what you do on the landing page. You could literally be using your homepage and that will be okay. So again, my approach really changed through the months, and who knows what trick we will find next.
Oh, that's so cool. I mean, that is a trick that you see a lot in rewarded ads and other things like that, where they trigger SK overlay like twice or 3 times in the course of a multi-unit. And I confess, I do not like it there. Unless I have invoked it. But this, what you're talking about, is a completely different use. Somebody has actually clicked for more info about that. So actually triggering SK overlay and bringing in the App Store, it's kind of overlay right there, is perfectly appropriate and perfectly works. And your app landing page, your app listing page in the App Store becomes your landing page, which is exactly. You can do your ASO, and every benefit you do on the ASO has a benefit here. Love it. Very, very, very cool. Paid content. I recently talked to, I think it was a retail marketer who does a lot on mobile, and they did a lot on paid content. I also talked to somebody in the health and fitness space about half a year ago who did a lot here, and it was innovative back then, and I hadn't heard anybody else who was doing this, but now talking to you and you're doing this, I don't think is in most mobile user acquisition growth managers playbook. I don't think it's in their tool yet. Talk about what this is, how it works, why you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an amazing tool, to be honest, because again, it's a completely different audience. You're going to be able to reach people that maybe you're not going to be able to reach with like this usual social media channels or everything else. It's highly trackable. So again, it's perfect. But so it sounds really perfect. CPM are really, really cheap. So the dream, right? There's only one thing. you need a lot of resources and time and money to make it work. So at Blinkist, for example, we were really like, we kind of like went in saying like, this is gonna work. Dot. There was no, and everyone was on board. I think I remember at the time the founder was like super on board. He really wanted to get it done. And so we invested tons of resources and time to make it work. And it took us 8 months. 8 months of
Wow.
failing, like what, but failing, a lot of
That's
failing
dedication.
and
Wow. Most
dedication.
performance marketers would give up after 8 weeks.
Exactly, but it paid off. Right now, they're still running a lot of paid content. They still like leveraging sometimes the same article that we wrote like 6 years ago. So again, it's a channel that if you can figure out is going to bring you like insane good results, and the people cannot replicate. Because if you look at the at the book summary space and Headway versus Blinkist, for example, I think Headway became really good on social, but they never, I don't think that they could never really like take the paid content side. So I think it's just like, again, it takes that dedication, and you cannot even copy Blinkist at this point. It's not going to work. The thing that you need to get right are, so there's a component that is about like campaign management, setup and tracking and automation, because it's also like a pretty complex channel, I would say. Is like sometimes when you look at, I mean, the interface has changed right now. There's a lot of automation, but at the time when I was using it, it felt like Meta, but like years before. So there was a
Mhm.
lot of manual things. It was just like really lengthy, so not so easy. Then you have everything regarding the ads, and the ads that work for paid content, they're completely different from the ads for like Meta. So you have all these like kind of still life images, black and white, whatever. They're really different. And then you have the title that is important. Then you have the content, like, what is that is going to be driving. And it needs to be something that is interesting, so make people click, but you don't want just clickbait. Like, you need to be able to sell and connect it with the product. And then you have the landing page setup. So again, imagine all the variables that are in and the things that you can do. So I think at some point we were running maybe like, I don't know, 30 A/B tests probably at the same time, until we were able to get to what one article with that setup that really worked. And then it was amazing. But again, it takes a lot of time and a lot of like iteration. Also, people think like, oh, you try, you get it right. Actually, you try, you see some metrics that are good, and then you start iterating until you find, I call it the holy grail, like that article, that piece of content that is gonna like just get you money.
Yeah.
So again, it's something that I love, but to be honest, it was super successful for Blinkist. It's been really hard to try to replicate it with other companies. One where I tried, of course, is Paired, but I think that the connection with the audience was not there. I think Blinkist was just like that sweet spot. And I couldn't really make it happen. The CPM were always cheap, but also conversion will be dropping. But again, I never really tested for 8 months. And I think this is the main difference that I've seen. It's really hard for me to find a company that is like, yeah, take the money, take 8 months, take the resources, go and do your magic. Like, they always are like, okay, I want results in a month, and this is not a channel where you can get results in a month.
What I will say is, and it was an Australian company, I believe in the beauty space that I talked to, who was doing this, and they were super successful. And they were doing paid content with brands like Vogue, Harper's Bazaar,
Mm.
those types of brands. And it was not crazy expensive. We're talking like $3,000 a placement or something like that. And then they would use that. And similarly to you, there's some that just took off and hit, and they had like 100,000 installs from that, and that's pretty good ROI.
Mm-hmm.
$3,000 for 100,000 installs, especially if they're engaged. So there's a
Absolutely.
lot that's available there, and I'll when I do the blog post on this, I'll link
Mm-hmm.
up what you're talking with what I was hearing from her as well. And I think
Yeah.
that there is some gold in that. That is so cool and so
Mm.
underused. And I don't think and they were a small startup. She was a tiny startup with just a few people, and I don't think they spent 8 months on it either. So maybe it's gotten a lot easier over time also.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. we're running out of time, but we have to talk about web onboarding. We have to talk about onboarding people on a website, mobile website in almost every case, right? And why people
Mm-hmm.
do that, how people do that. One of the things you talked about is you talked about reducing store fees to around 5%. I'm guessing when I'm interpreting that 5% of your users are actually paying and you're losing the store fees based on that. But maybe you mean something different. I don't know. But obviously
Mm-hmm.
there's some real interest here. Talk about web onboarding.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, web onboarding is now like a trend. I think a lot of apps are actually using that. Um, the reason that it's so interesting is that it really gives you a way to explain your product and connect with the users at the same time while they do the onboarding. So it doesn't really work for every company, but I think especially for verticals that are new or for products where you need to upsell the value and maybe send them directly to like, to an app store page will not work. It can be like a super useful tool. And I just like there's like an amazing presentation from Yeva Koldovska on like the ABO empathy based onboarding that I think everyone should like have a look at because I think it's really, really cool. And this is exactly what you're doing with the web onboarding. You are creating empathy connection with the user so that you can upsell. Um, the difference with like, so you have all the pros of like the web to app with the mini landing pages, you have better tracking. It's actually much simpler than the web to app because at this point, conversion happens on web. So you just need a pixel. You just need to send back parameters, easy peasy. Um, regarding how much you can earn there. So the thing is that you don't have to pay the App Store and Play Store fee. You still have to pay the fee of your web payment provider. So, for example, with Stripe, it will be 5%. So that's why you can cut that to 5%.
Got it.
Now, what happened? Like it's an interesting test to do to check like the companies that are doing both app and web onboarding and look at the pricing that they offer on their app and the pricings that they offer on the web onboarding. Usually, what we'll find is that the web onboarding is almost like a product per se with like A/B testing, special pricing, even like different type of like subscription length and so on. So we with my clients as well, I always recommend to go for the 3 months, even if they don't have it in the app. And I'll tell you soon why. So again, it's super interesting. The only like why not everyone is doing that is like it needs to be empathy based. And I think a lot of startups go into this thinking like, let's ask the question that we're going to use for the app. No, you're not doing that. You're trying to connect to your user. So you need to ask questions that maybe don't really relate that much to, I mean, they need to be somehow related, right? It's not that you can ask completely random questions, but you need to make them feel heard. And so, although data is amazing, you can look at how many people, go from one page to another. It's really important to talk to these users to understand when the aha moment happened. So when we launched our second version of the web onboarding appear, we did some user testing with real users and try to understand when was that question. And questions are like on paper from a data point of view were like, okay, average, not skipped, that's okay. They were actually the questions that people felt like, oh my God, yes, I never thought about this about my relationship. I never thought about like my behavior. So again, you need to be more an expert in psychology, I would say, when you do the web onboarding than on everything else. And there are some benchmark. So for example, there's like, I think Funnel Fox published like some interesting benchmark about web. And I think you need to have between 40 and 60% of users that after landing on your first page, they go to the second page.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like other benchmark on like how many people will reach the apps, the paywall and so on. So again, the benchmark are completely different. One thing that I wanted to say is that you need to play a little bit with the monetization here. So I mentioned before about the 3 months. Users will, so the retention on web is amazing. Like it's probably going to be, I mean, maybe not for everyone, but I have like for a lot of companies between 60 and 70% retention. It doesn't matter really the length. I mean, I'm talking about maybe 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year. So it's an amazing retention. because of this retention, while maybe on app you tend to be more aggressive and say like, okay, like I want to be profitable in 8 days, on web, I think you need to give it a bit more time. Maybe you care about being successful in, 91 days. So just the length of the 3 months plan, but like you need to play with that and see like, okay, when do you actually want to be profitable? Knowing that you have all this money coming in, that it doesn't really happen on the upward. So you need to be smart. And the other thing is trials don't work. I know that some companies are having it. Maybe, maybe with the product that I deal with, it was like that. But having people directly purchase is usually the best options. And then again, play
Not
on the way,
for
the type
that.
of price. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there's a lot here. We could do an episode about this one, but I'm gonna stop here. Sorry.
No, this is perfect. I love it. You're absolutely dropping nuggets left, right, and center. It's absolutely perfect. Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up that just on web onboarding. What I love about what you said about web onboarding is also in your LinkedIn title, where you have CMO in there, but you also have performance marketing in there. And what's interesting about that is this psychology component smells a little bit more like old school marketing
Yes.
and the CMO thing where you understand people and understand their motivations and you work with that. And there's also this combination of this new school, it's numbers and it's performance and it's, so you get the left brain and the right brain and they're kind of thinking
Mm-hmm.
and it's absolutely love
Yeah.
it. I want to hit one more thing before we close. And that's one of the things that you said. I think you almost touched on it in one of your answers. You've talked about treating web and app funnels as separate. And you talked about that
Mm-hmm.
just now, actually, in terms of, your product length and maybe even your pricing and stuff like that. But the flow is different, right? The creatives may be different. The opportunity for personalization could be different. You might know a lot more about somebody who comes in via the web just because you have access to more
Mm-hmm.
data, right? Talk about that briefly.
Again, you're not really targeting the same users. Like these are completely two set of users. Now, they may be overlapping for sure. But I mean, you can see like you can just experiment, like run the same creative, the same ad, the same audience, like the same targeting with web and app, and you're gonna actually have different results. Your top creatives may be different. So for this reason, like what I've seen is that creatives that work for app, they may not be working for web and vice versa. Now, there's not like these may evolve. But for example, right now, this kind of like take the quiz creative, lengthy creatives with like multiple choices, what I call them the archetype creatives, where you have like, what type of learner are you? What type of lover are you? They seem to be attracting better like an older audience or like a web audience, but they don't work as well on the app. So what I can recommend is like, I mean, most of the companies that, especially the one that I'm working with, they are in a stage where you cannot really do creative testing on both. But what I say is like, usually, if something is working on app, it will be working on web. But if there is something that you're like it should have worked, or maybe you see some interesting stats on the CTR, on the CPI, but people don't convert, try to move that creative on web as well. Or if you can, of course, afford it, like do creative testing both on app and on web and see what works. And you really like treat them differently.
Mhm.
Also, colors sometimes there are certain colors that may be working better with web campaigns and are not working with app campaigns. And then in terms of personalization, I think, and again, this is like a level that maybe not many companies can do. You did it like you said it right. You're asking so many questions, so you can customize the journey so much. First of all, don't make them repeat the onboarding when they come to the app. That's the basic, right? Because otherwise they're gonna like freak out. But also like, can you use the information to send them like interesting piece of content, nuggets, notification, email based on what they say? Or maybe, for example, change the way that your, life cycle marketing to really reflect what they answer at the beginning. I think this is how you have to treat them completely separate. And also, there's no reason for you not to be running these two campaigns at the same time. So I think this is like one issue that sometimes advertisers do, that is like they go all in on web and they forgot about app. Try to keep them both alive, if possible, with different creators, I would say. But yeah, that's the short answer, let's say.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Jessica, you are absolutely awesome. Love the things that you're doing, what you're working on. You're an all-star. Thank you for taking this
Oh,
time.
thank you so much for having me. It was really, really fun to talk to you.